In this video, I'm going to outline how I built my race strategy for my first 100-mile race.
3, 2, 1,
In 2024, I ran two 50-mile races, a challenging 50K, and my first 100-miler. First, I thought I would talk about how I came about picking which 100-mile race to do. This is something that I agonized over because there were so many choices. Ultimately, I chose Rio del Lago for 3 reasons. The first reason was because I had run the American River 50 mile, which shares a good portion of the course with Rio del Lago. So at least probably 50 miles of this course I had seen before. So it wasn't going to be totally new to me, which for a first 100 miler felt ideal. I like to run in new places, but I figured for my first time, knowing some of the course was going to be to my advantage. The second reason was that I wanted to pick a challenging course in terms of vertical feet, but nothing that seemed too overwhelming. So for example, the challenging 50K that I ran last year had about 550 feet of elevation change per mile. Rio del Lago had about 200 feet of elevation change per mile, totaling about 10,000 feet. This felt doable to me, but also it didn't feel like I was running a super flat road course. There was some good sections on the trail, but there was some bike path course as well. The third reason was the location. I liked Folsom, California. It's a pretty quick flight for me, and so the travel felt very doable. After months of training, I set the goal to run my first 100-mile race in sub 24 hours. For my road marathon friends, this is similar to you wanting to run a road marathon in under 4 hours. I knew it was going to be a challenge, but I really wanted to set a goal that was going to push me. I had done 3 other races that year with just the goal to finish. So this time I wanted to set a time goal, and I felt it was doable. And of course, I had that B goal of finishing in the 30-hour cutoff. I have never created a race strategy as detailed as the plan that I made for Rio del Lago. And I have my coach Anne to thank for that. After training on my own for my 50-miler, I knew that I could use outside guidance to double that distance. This race strategy that I created was a great example of why that was, because she really pushed me to keep adding more and more detail and be more and more specific in ways that I wouldn't have done on my own. I created my plan by using the aid station chart to make notes of things like where I was going to see my crew, what I was going to need at each spot, how many calories I was going to have, and when my pacers was going to join me, and so on. I created legs for my race, which mostly lined up with the aid stations with a few exceptions. Then I wrote what the elevation change was and the distance for each of those legs, how long I thought it was going to take me to complete each leg, and I'm using a lot of data from training runs to figure out, to figure out those estimations. Once I had an estimated time that it would take for me to get from leg to leg, I would then write out how many calories and water I needed to consume for each of those legs. And this was really important for building my drop bags and knowing how much food to put in each bag so that my crew would be able to put that into my pack. And I know what some of you are thinking. The entire time I made this plan, I was thinking, wow, this is a great exercise and something that could go completely wrong, and I might not end up doing anything on this list. You just never know what's going to happen during a 100-mile race. I could end up vomiting at mile 70, and the whole plan goes downhill from there. Spoiler, that didn't happen. After I created this first draft, I shared it with Anne, and she pushed me to add even more detail. She said, what is your crew going to do at each of those legs? So I then added to my spreadsheet, I made all of this in a spreadsheet, and put exactly what each person was going to do. So maybe Angie was going to offer me more socks, Sam was going to charge my watch or take my headlamp from me, and Kelsey was always in charge of taking my pack off and restocking it with whatever was in my drop bag. After I revised this plan and sent it back to Anne, she pushed me to add even more detail. She said to add exact times as to when I expected to be at each aid station, and when I expected to leave. So how long did you plan to spend at each of those aid stations? This was a critical part of building my plan, and that's because what I learned was I wasn't going to make my time goal with the paces that I had estimated and if I spent very much time at each of those aid stations. So I went back through, I got a little bit more specific with my pace goals, and then I wrote time limits as to how long I could spend at an aid station. Once my race strategy was polished, I then went on to building my drop bags. So each drop bag had my name on it, my bib number, and I used bright colored duct tape to just make my bag more visible for my crew to find at each aid station, including the one aid station where I didn't have crew. It made it easier for me to find. In addition to my bag having everything I needed inside of it, I also put a note card inside of the drop bag that said what was in the drop bag. I could also leave any notes for my crew on that note card, but this is also mostly because once I had built all the drop bags, I realized that I could not fly with all of the drop bags in my carry-on because of all the liquid goo inside. So rather than just starting over when we got to Folsom, I just wrote what was in each bag so that when we got there, we could just double check, make sure everything that we needed was still inside. So if Kelsey got to an aid station and saw that there were 6 liquid goos and 2 packets of Tailwind in the drop bag, she knew that all of that needed to go in my pack for the next leg of my race. My notes also included things like when to charge my watch and when I would need to change shoes. At mile 69, there was an aid station that didn't allow drop bags, but it did allow crew. And at that aid station, Kelsey and Angie had pizza for me, and it was my plan then to change clothes because it was going to be dark at this point, and having a dry sports bra and long sleeve shirt was going to be important. I also at that point put on my waist light in addition to my headlamp. So all of this was documented on the spreadsheet so that my crew would know to have it all ready for me. This was my longest aid station stop for the entire race, which was 18 minutes long. The rest of my stops were an average of 5 to 9 minutes, depending on what I was doing, if I was eating or just grabbing more stuff for my pack. As I mentioned, all of this was documented in a spreadsheet. So it was specifically designed for Kelsey, my crew chief, to use. And I'm going to put a picture up here for you, but the spreadsheet, she was able to write on there also how long it took me at each aid station and what time I actually arrived there. That way, if I was ahead or behind, she could then make notes and know like when she would need to be at each aid station. So to my surprise, this race plan worked really well. We did actually stick to it for the most part. There was only one thing in the drop bags that I didn't end up eating, which was these scratch chews. They just kind of gave me acid reflux. They hadn't been something I had used really long, and I ended up sticking to mostly the liquid goo and pizza. So I was super pleased with how the race went. I know, I finished in 23 hours and 9 minutes, so I had some extra time to spare, and I know that could have easily been eaten up by spending too much time at an aid station. In total, my plan allowed for 80 minutes at aid station stops. That was 10 to 20 minutes depending on the stop, and I spent 55 minutes at aid stations. My crew was like a well-oiled machine. They took really good care of me, and I appreciated them greatly. But I can definitely see how having this plan in place was instrumental to hitting that finishing time. every time I went to an aid station, Kelsey was in charge of setting a timer just to make sure I wasn't there too long. I never had that issue, but it's something could have totally happened to make that, even if I just needed a nap, which I didn't end up taking. I can't stress enough how important this race strategy was for me. It did seem a little bit OCD at the time when I was making it. I worried that maybe it was a big waste of my time since, it could all fall apart very easily. But Kelsey was super grateful to have it. And it ended up being very stress relieving for me making it because I got really in tune with the course, with what to expect. I knew the aid stations by heart by the time I got there because I had written them down so many times. This started as handwritten notes. It went into a Word document, and then it ultimately made it into a spreadsheet. So I had just written it out a lot. I felt super familiar with what to expect. I don't think I would have done it any differently. I'm about to start a race strategy for my next race, and it's going to look very similar.